The first sound is silence. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that carries weight. The hush that settles over a small town just before dawn. The store sits in that hush, its glass windows holding the faint breath of night, its aisles lined with things waiting to be touched. And then, without warning, the quiet is broken by the faint tap of claws against concrete, a rhythm too delicate to belong to a dog, too cautious to belong to anything tame. At the door, a shadow pauses, the lean frame of a bobcat, his fur mottled with earth and autumn light, shoulders tense, eyes sharp with a wild stillness. Between his teeth, a single dry leaf trembles. The store has been closed for hours, yet he stands there as though this place has always been his destination. He leans forward, drops the leaf on the threshold, and lingers only long enough for the gesture to feel deliberate. Then he turns, vanishing back into the gray veil of morning. The first time it feels like chance, wind, coincidence, a creature passing through. But the owner notices. A man who has risen early for years, unlocking his store before the sun stretches high enough to scatter shadows. He bends to pick up the leaf, puzzled, the memory of paw prints faint in the dust. He doesn't think much of it, not yet. The day begins, shelves are stocked, customers trickle in, and by nightfall the leaf has been forgotten. But morning returns, and so does the bobcat. Again the whisper of claws. Again the careful placement of a leaf, this time greener, curled at its edges like something carried from a far-off branch. He doesn't linger. He never waits for a witness. His visits are fleeting, almost secretive, as though the act itself is what matters, not the recognition. The owner begins to notice more than the leaves. He notices the timing, always before the town stirs, always in the same silence. He notices the restraint in the animal's movements, the way wildness steps softly here, without hunger, without threat. Each morning he finds another leaf resting at the entrance like a message written in a language too old to translate. Days turn into weeks. A pattern takes root. The bobcat arrives with the same deliberate pace, the same strange gift carried between his teeth. Oak leaves, maple, sometimes brittle scraps of grass woven with dirt. No two are the same, yet each feels part of a ritual, a rhythm carved quietly into the dawn. At first the owner tells himself it means nothing. Just instinct, an animal's strange quirk. But inside something shifts. He begins to expect the visits. He begins to rise a little earlier. Not for the shelves, not for the lights or locks, but for the silence at the door. There's an unspoken weight in these offerings, something that pulls at the edge of his solitude. The mornings become sacred. The leaves gather, tucked away in a small wooden box behind the counter. He doesn't know why he keeps them. Perhaps because he doesn't want to discard something carried with such care. Perhaps because each one feels like a question that deserves an answer he cannot yet give. And in that ritual, the man finds himself listening differently. He listens to the scratch of paws that arrive just before light. He listens to the pause that follows, the space between the leaf being dropped and the retreating steps that fade into trees. He listens to his own breath in those moments, steadier than before, as if some wild rhythm is teaching him how to measure time differently. One morning, the air is heavy with the scent of rain. Clouds fold low over the rooftops, and the bobcat appears again, damp fur clinging to his frame, the leaf darker now with moisture. The man watches from the shadow of the window, heart caught in the simplicity of it. An untamed creature unafraid of glass or distance, arriving with the same wordless gesture. The leaf falls, and for a heartbeat the bobcat lifts his gaze toward the store. Not long enough to be called a stare, not sharp enough to be called a challenge. Just long enough to be felt. The man doesn't move. He doesn't breathe too loudly. He simply watches as the animal melts back into the rain, leaving behind silence once again. There is no explanation. None is offered, none is sought. Yet in the quiet corners of the store where dust gathers on shelves and time feels slow, the ritual begins to settle into him like a memory he didn't know he needed. The town goes on. People buy their bread, their milk, their passing necessities. They do not notice the leaves. They do not ask about the small wooden box behind the counter. The man doesn't tell them. Some things feel too fragile for words, too sacred for casual mention. What matters is the dawn. What matters is the sound of steps that do not belong to any human. The arrival of something both near and untouchable. What matters is the truth he feels but cannot name, that he is no longer alone in the mornings, and so it continues. A leaf, a pause, a retreat, a silence. until the silence begins to press heavier than before, as though the ritual is not just a gesture but a question waiting to be answered. The mornings no longer feel complete without him. The man has grown accustomed to the faint shift in the air just before the bobcat appears, as if the earth itself whispers a signal. He keeps the store lights off a little longer now, lingering in the half-dark so the ritual arrives unbroken. On this morning, frost clings to the glass. The world outside breathes a faint white mist, and the bobcat steps from that breath with the same deliberate calm. But today the leaf he carries is not whole. It is torn, frayed, its veins exposed like fragile bones. He lays it down carefully, almost reverently, and for the first time he hesitates. His head tilts, his ears flick, and his gaze lifts toward the man standing still behind the window. For a moment there is no barrier between them. Just silence. Just the truth of two lives intersecting in a ritual neither fully understands. And then, without sound, the bobcat turns away, fading into the pale woods. The man kneels at the threshold, fingertips brushing the broken leaf. A shiver runs through him, not from the cold, but from the sudden knowledge that this is not random. Each leaf, each step, each pause carries meaning. He doesn't know what the meaning is, but he knows enough to feel its weight. That is the first twist. The ritual is not simple instinct. It is intentional. He begins to notice things he hadn't before. The direction from which the bobcat arrives is always the same, from the north, where the tree line thickens into a narrow corridor of birch and cedar. His paws leave faint trails in the frost, disappearing quickly as the morning sun softens the ground. The man finds himself staring toward that direction, wondering what lies hidden beyond his sight. Days pass. The ritual continues. Each leaf is placed with the same deliberate calm, yet the man begins to sense a tension beneath it, as though the bobcat is asking for something. The silence has grown heavier, almost pleading. One evening after closing, he sits alone with the wooden box, its lid lifted, the gathered leaves fragile in his hands. The variety stuns him: maple, oak, birch, pine needles bound in mud. They are not chosen at random. They are carried, brought with effort, offered with consistency. He feels a strange responsibility pressing in on him, as if these gifts are no longer his to simply receive, but his to understand. The second twist arrives unexpectedly. A storm pushes in overnight. Branches shudder, rain slashes the pavement, and the town sleeps restless under the weight of thunder. At dawn, the man opens his door, expecting absence, certain no wild creature would endure such weather. But there, drenched and trembling, the bobcat waits. In his mouth is not a leaf, but something else entirely. A scrap of cloth, torn and muddied, its threads unraveling under the weight of rain. He drops it on the threshold, shoulders heaving from the effort of the storm. His eyes lift, wild and steady, as though daring the man to ignore it. Then he turns, disappearing into the torrent without pause. The man stands frozen. Water pools around the fragment of fabric. He kneels, fingers trembling as he lifts it, the fibers soft and frayed, carrying the faint scent of earth and smoke. This is not part of the ritual. This is something new, something urgent. The storm swallows the bobcat's trail, but the man feels it etched into him. The leaves had been questions. This is the beginning of an answer. Inside the store, the wooden box waits. He lays the soaked cloth beside the leaves, heart pounding with the quiet realization that his mornings are no longer his own. The bobcat has pulled him into something larger, something hidden beyond the glass and shelves. And in that storm-heavy silence, one truth settles deeper than all the rest he will have to follow. The storm passes, but it leaves behind a heaviness that lingers in the streets. Branches litter the ground, gutters swell with water, and the air smells of damp earth and smoke. The man unlocks his store as always, though his thoughts are not on the shelves or the stock. They circle only one question: why a cloth and not a leaf? The morning feels strange without him. Hours slip by and the threshold remains bare. The silence sharpens, settling deeper into the aisles, into the wooden box that waits behind the counter. The man keeps glancing at the door, expecting, hoping, listening. But the bobcat does not come. That absence is the first twist. For the first time in weeks, the ritual is broken. And in the fracture, the man feels a weight heavier than he expected. The weight of something he had quietly come to depend on. He moves through the day distracted, every sound outside pulling him back to the door, every shadow reminding him of what is missing. The following morning he rises even earlier, standing in the dark with the door half open, letting in the cold breath of dawn. Still no claws on concrete, no offering left at his feet. Only the slow unfurling of daylight across the empty street. It is then that he realizes, this is not chance anymore. The bobcat's absence is not simple delay. It is a silence that asks him to act. He slips the damp scrap of cloth into his coat pocket. He does not lock the store. Instead, he steps into the direction he has always seen the bobcat come from, the narrow corridor of birch and cedar that waits at the edge of town. The forest greets him with a hush so profound it feels alive. Branches drip with yesterday's rain, each drop striking the ground like a muted clock. He walks slowly, cautious but determined, the earth soft beneath his boots. He does not know what he is looking for, only that the bobcat has asked him to look. The trail is faint, nearly lost in the storm's wash, but he catches glimpses. A paw print here, a pressed leaf there, small signs of passage. He follows them deeper into the trees, into air that grows colder, heavier, and then, without warning, the second twist. The sound reaches him first, a thin, muffled cry, barely there, yet raw with desperation. He freezes. The forest holds its breath. The cry comes again, weaker, frayed at the edges. Not human, not bobcat, something else. He pushes forward, heart quickening, until he finds the source. Beneath a tangle of fallen branches, wedged in the debris left by the storm, a small form trembles. A fawn, legs tangled, sides heaving, eyes wide with panic. The scrap of cloth in his pocket burns against his hand, the connection undeniable. And there, not far from the trapped creature, the bobcat waits. His body is low to the ground, muscles taut, eyes fixed not on prey but on the man. He does not move closer, does not flee. He only watches as though he has led the man here, as though this has been the meaning all along. The man kneels, hands working carefully through the branches, pulling away the weight that pins the fragile body. The fawn's breath is rapid, its thin legs trembling when freed, but it stands unsteady and fragile, before slipping back into the shadows of the forest. The bobcat does not follow. He remains still, a shadow among shadows, his gaze holding steady on the man who kneels in the aftermath of rescue. And then, as silently as he arrived, he turns, disappearing into the deeper woods. The man stays crouched for a long moment, breath loud in the hush of the forest. He understands little but enough. The ritual of leaves had not been meaningless. The scrap of cloth had not been random. Each act had been a summons, a call to follow, a request made not with words but with the weight of presence. When he returns to the store, the box of leaves waits as it always has. But now it feels different. No longer a collection of curiosities, but a record of trust. A record of a wild creature choosing to reach across the divide of silence. And in that realization, something shifts quietly inside him. He knows this is not finished. The bobcat will return, and when he does, the man will be ready to follow again. The days that follow unfold with a new kind of silence. It is not the hollow silence of absence, nor the ordinary hush of dawn. It is the silence of waiting. The man feels it in the way he lingers by the window longer than before, in the way his hands hover over the wooden box of leaves as if the fragile stems might pulse with meaning if he touches them often enough. He is no longer the same man who once thought of the ritual as odd, or even charming. He is someone tethered now, bound to an unseen rhythm in the woods, to an animal who has chosen him in ways he cannot yet name. On the fourth morning after the storm, the sound returns. Light as rain against glass, the scrape of claws on stone. He opens the door before the bobcat can vanish, and there he is, fur dark with damp, eyes lit by that unblinking intensity. Between his teeth, a leaf once again, whole perfect, veined with the red fire of autumn. The man does not move. He lets the animal place the leaf on the threshold, lets the silence swell between them. But this time, when the bobcat turns to leave, the man steps forward, not rushing, not closing the gap. Just enough to let the bobcat know, I am ready. The bobcat pauses. For the first time, he does not vanish instantly into the trees. He waits. And in that waiting, the man feels the quiet invitation. He follows. The path winds deeper than before, beyond the familiar corridor of birch and cedar, into woods where the ground grows soft and dark, where moss clings thick to stone and air tastes of hidden water. The bobcat moves with silent certainty, never too far ahead, never too close, as though measuring the man's willingness. After a time, The forest opens into a clearing scarred by storm. Branches lie scattered, trunks snapped and splintered, the earth churned by rushing water. The bobcat halts at the edge, muscles taut, gaze steady. The man follows his line of sight. At first it looks like nothing more than wreckage. But then he sees it, the shape caught between broken timber half buried in mud. Not an animal this time. A structure. A cabin, small and worn, its roof half collapsed, its walls scarred with the mark of water's rise and fall. The man steps closer, the weight of realization pressing down with each breath. The scrap of cloth, the silence, the leaves. This is the place the bobcat has been asking him to see. Inside, the air is thick with damp and decay. Furniture overturned, papers bloated with water. The faint scent of smoke clinging to wood. It is not empty of memory. It is heavy with it, and then the twist. On the floor, half covered by debris, lies a small blanket. Torn, muddied, frayed along its edges. The same fabric as the scrap the bobcat had carried to the store. Beside it, a single shoe, child-sized, stiff with dirt. The man kneels, breath catching in his chest. His hands hover, unwilling to disturb what time has already claimed. A storm had not just broken branches here. It had broken lives. He turns toward the bobcat, who lingers in the doorway, eyes sharp, unflinching. The animal does not move closer, does not retreat. He only holds the silence as though demanding the man understand. This is why the ritual began. The man cannot know the full story. He cannot know whose cabin this was or whose life was carried away when the water rose, but he feels the truth pressing into him nonetheless. The bobcat is not only a wanderer. He is a witness. He has carried this memory, this grief, this call for recognition into every leaf laid at the store's door. And that realization is the transformation. The leaves were not gifts. They were markers. They were fragments of a world lost to the storm, carried by an animal who refused to let silence swallow it whole. Each offering was a plea. See what I have seen. Remember what must not be forgotten. The man gathers the blanket and the small shoe, carrying them carefully in his arms as though they still breathe with meaning. The bobcat follows at a distance, his presence steady, his silence heavy with something more than instinct. When they reach the store, the man places the objects gently beside the wooden box of leaves. He does not close the lid. He does not hide them away. Instead, he lets them rest in the open, where memory can breathe, where grief can be honored without words. That night, he does not sleep easily. The image of the cabin lingers in his mind, the sound of rushing water, the weight of what was lost. But beneath the sorrow, there is also something else, a quiet thread of hope. Because in the wild persistence of a bobcat, in the ritual of leaves and silence, a story has been carried forward. What was broken has not been erased. What was lost has not been abandoned. And in that truth, the man feels himself changed. The following morning, the ritual continues. The bobcat arrives with another leaf, places it at the threshold, and lingers just long enough for the silence to swell. The man bends, not to take the leaf away, but to place his hand flat on the ground beside it, not reaching for the animal, not closing the space between them, but offering something of his own in return. Presence, patience, acknowledgement. The bobcat watches, unblinking. For a moment, the distance between wild and human feels smaller than ever before. And then, with the same quiet grace, the bobcat turns and disappears into the trees. But the silence he leaves behind is no longer heavy with questions. It is heavy with truth. And in that truth lies the beginning of something deeper. Not just ritual, not just mystery, but a bond that will ask both of them to carry more than themselves. The nights grow colder. Frost blooms on the windows, fragile patterns that dissolve at the first touch of light. Each morning, the bobcat still comes, steady, unwavering. A leaf laid gently at the door, as though the ritual itself is what keeps the silence from swallowing everything whole. The man receives them differently now. Each leaf feels like a weight and a prayer, not simply a gesture, but a continuation of the story that binds them both. The box behind the counter is no longer just a collection. It has become an altar, and beside it rests the small blanket and shoe, reminders that grief belongs not only to humans but to the earth itself, carried in the quiet persistence of the wild. The first twist arrives with absence. One morning the leaf does not come. The door remains bare. the silence stretching deeper than before. He waits longer than usual, standing in the cold breath of dawn, ears straining for the scrape of claws. Nothing. By noon he has abandoned the shelves and aisles. His eyes are fixed only on the road that leads north. The following day, still nothing. A weight presses into him, heavier than when the ritual broke before. He knows now what it means when the silence changes shape. Something has happened. Something has pulled the bobcat from his rhythm. On the third day he cannot bear the waiting. He leaves the store behind and steps once more into the corridor of birch and cedar. His boots crunch softly on frozen ground, breath rising in pale clouds, every step thick with unease. The forest is still, too still, as if holding its breath. He finds the trail at last. Paw prints pressed faintly into the frost, leading deeper, wavering as though the steps themselves were unsteady. He follows them into a gully where branches tangle thick, and there, half hidden in shadow, he finds him. The bobcat lies low, sides heaving, a dark stain of blood against his fur. A hunter's trap has snapped cruelly around his leg, iron teeth biting into flesh. His eyes burn with pain, but they do not close. They hold steady, fierce even in suffering, as though daring the world to see him as anything less than whole. The man freezes, breath torn from his chest. For a heartbeat he does not move, overwhelmed by the sight of wildness brought low. But then something steadies in him. The bond of all those mornings, all those leaves, all that silence. He kneels, hands trembling as they reach for the trap. The bobcat does not lash out. He does not flee. He watches, unblinking, as the man pries the cruel iron apart with bare strength, metal biting into his palms, until at last the jaws release. The bobcat collapses into the earth, body quivering, breath ragged. The man gathers him carefully, lifting the weight of fur and bone into his arms, carrying him as though carrying something sacred. This is the second twist. The bobcat, once the giver, is now the one who must be saved. Back at the store, the man clears a space in the storeroom, lining it with old blankets. He cleans the wound with gentle hands, each touch both reverent and desperate, knowing how fragile the trust between them truly is. The bobcat does not fight him. He endures, eyes half-lidded, breath shallow, body heavy with exhaustion. For days the man tends to him. He brings water in a shallow bowl, food set just within reach, warmth layered thick against the cold. He speaks no words, he knows words mean nothing here, but his presence is constant, steady as the dawn itself. And slowly, strength returns. The bobcat begins to rise, first unsteady, then steadier, his eyes regaining their sharpness. Each time he meets the man's gaze, something passes between them. Not gratitude, not submission, but something deeper, acknowledgement, recognition. The silent truth that survival has bound them both in ways neither sought yet neither can deny. Outside, the leaves continue to fall, blanketing the ground in fragile color. The man does not gather them anymore. He leaves them where they are, knowing the ritual has changed. It is no longer about offerings laid at the door. It is about presence shared in silence, about a wild creature choosing not to flee even when the way is open. And in that silence, a new kind of bond takes root. Not the bond of ritual, but the bond of sacrifice. The winter deepens. Frost climbs higher on the windows each morning, and the hush of snow begins to soften the town. In the storeroom, the bobcat rests, his wound mending, his breath stronger with each passing day. The man moves around him with care, every gesture slow, every sound measured, as if afraid that suddenness might shatter what has grown between them. The days pass in this quiet rhythm. Water refreshed, food placed gently. The old blankets warmed by a stove kept burning even when the store grows cold. The bobcat no longer hides his eyes when the man draws near. He lifts them, steady and unflinching, the same way he once lifted them at the door when he carried leaves. But wildness cannot be contained. The man knows it. Each time the bobcat's muscles twitch with returning strength, each time his gaze flicks toward the door, the truth becomes clearer. He does not belong to walls or aisles or blankets. He belongs to the hush of trees, to the silence of dawn, to the freedom of claw and shadow. The first twist arrives gently without warning. One morning the bobcat rises fully for the first time. His leg is scarred, but it holds him. He takes a step, then another, slow but sure, the weight of healing visible in every movement. The man watches, heart caught between relief and ache. This is what he wanted, for the creature to live, to stand again. Yet in that strength lies the truth he cannot escape. Soon, he will leave. For days, the bobcat lingers near the storeroom door, testing its frame, staring toward the pale light that slips in from outside. The man does not stop him. He does not lock the way. He only waits, carrying the quiet knowledge that love, in its truest form, is never possession. The second twist comes with silence, and the silence of absence, the silence he once feared. One morning, the man enters the storeroom and finds the blankets empty. The door has been nudged open, snow traced faintly across the threshold. The bobcat is gone. The man kneels, fingers pressed into the imprint left in the blanket, the warmth already fading. The ache in his chest is sharp, but beneath it there is no bitterness, no despair, only a stillness filled with memory. The mornings of leaves, the storm, the cabin, the wound, the weight of wildness carried in his arms. Days pass. The store feels quieter than ever, though the box of leaves remains, the blanket and shoe still resting beside it. He keeps them there, not as relics of grief, but as reminders of what silence can hold. And then, one morning, the hush of dawn breaks once again. The faint scrape of claws, the shift of air that carries wildness with it. The man opens the door. There at the threshold stands the bobcat. His body is leaner, his scar visible in the pale light, but his stance is steady, his gaze unbroken. Between his teeth a leaf trembles, whole, perfect, carried with care. He drops it gently onto the ground just as he did the first time, but this time he does not vanish into the trees. He lingers, eyes steady on the man, the silence between them heavy with all that has passed. A gesture, a farewell, a promise. The man bends, lifts the leaf, and places it into the wooden box already filled with so many.
He does not reach out, does not close the gap.
He only stands in the doorway, heart steady, letting the moment be what it is. Unspoken, eternal, enough. The bobcat turns then, melting once more into the pale woods. But the silence he leaves behind is no longer emptiness, it is fullness. It is memory. It is proof that even in the divide between human and wild, trust can be built, grief can be carried, and love can exist without ownership. The man closes the door, the weight of the leaf still warm in his palm. He sets it gently with the others, then lets his hand rest for a long moment on the wooden box. He does not need words to understand. He does not need answers, because sometimes the deepest truths are carried not in speech but in silence. Not in possession, but in presence. Not in permanence, but in the willingness to let go. And as the morning light spills across the floor, soft and golden, the man feels it settle into him. The quiet certainty that kindness, empathy, and connection are never wasted. They linger, like the hush of dawn, like the weight of a glance, like a leaf carried across the threshold of silence.